Okay, so we're going to spend a bit of time talking about a nice simple technique where we can trigger another subconscious response to your book. And this is where we add texture. So you can either add texture to the image or you can add texture to your book title. So again, whenever we're looking for texture images, Unsplash is a great friend here, as well as Pexels, or even Subtle Patterns, which is a kind of a website that was set up for web designers for making patterns for the back of their websites. So any sort of site that will kind of give you nice head-on textures. You definitely don't really want textures that are angled because they don't really look great whenever you go to apply it to your book. Now, keep in mind that we're generally only interested in the texture here. Now, occasionally you might want to bring in the color as well, for example there, but generally you only want the texture. So you're most likely going to need to grayscale the image that you choose. Now, this is very easily done in any sort of competent photo editor, or if you want, you can follow this technique on turning photos into textures inside of Photoshop. It's very, very simple, but I'll leave the link under the video here that basically goes in. So this is just a simple effort of extracting the texture for a leaf. Now, on my end, I use this technique inside of two different covers. So one of them was a cover for Watchmen, in which I used it to set the overall mood. So if we bring it off, this is the original image for my cover. After that, I set this texture. It's kind of like a rain, fogged up window sort of texture. But when it's applied with it, here I've just had it as an opacity as opposed to a multiply or something like that. It adds a nice little mood. And then when you include that with all your color grading and other techniques, it brings out a little bit better the kind of the overall feeling that you want to evoke in the reader. I also used it in another cover here, The Lost City, where it was on up here for the title of the book. In this case, again, the texture was applied just to the title, but to kind of evoke this sort of crumbling, hidden ruin settlement, like kind of Lost City. Well, if you do, that's the entire title of the book, but it's something that just kind of brings it a little bit further with the reader. So doing this is very, very simple, right? And I'm going to show you how to do it now in a minute. So we're going to go into our cover here for our book called The Cabin. So I've set up just a simple, nice simple font. So this is one of the reasons why I really like block fonts, okay? Because you've got a lot of space to work with. Adding texture to fonts specifically isn't really very easy when, for example, you're doing something like this sort of font, you know, where it's very thin and there isn't just a lot that you can kind of, for the reader to recognize the texture behind it. Now, in this case, we're just going to apply it to the font. We're not going to apply it to the image. So looking around how we do it, you would say, okay, in this here, I want to evoke a sort of a kind of an old sentiment. So you can either look, for example, for a wood texture, and maybe there's something here that might be looking, or in this case, what I wanted to do was a peeling paint texture to kind of give this sentiment of stuff that's abandoned. Okay, so, and in this case, I came across this really nice one here. So this is from Thomas Quinto, and I've got it inside of Photoshop right here. So I'm going to show you how to bring this into our texture. So first of all, we could just select everything, copy, and stick it in. It's pretty simple so far. And then what we do is we can go to transform it in order to scale it. So we scale it down until it just about covers what we want it to cover. So in this case, it would be our text. Now, there's two ways of applying this. One way is you can add, I think it's a clipping mask like this. But clipping masks, they kind of have, they have some sort of, what do you call it? I suppose negatives. They're not as flexible as the other thing. So the way I like to do it is what I do is I select the text. So I don't know if you should be able to see just our text is selected here behind it. And then I create a mask around our texture itself. So in this case, what we can do is we can break the link between the texture and the mask, because otherwise What happens if we want to move the texture? It comes out and it's not great. So what if we break that link, we leave the mask in place, and then we can move the texture behind, and we can position it to roughly where we want it. So if we say, okay, this here, this seems like a good kind of an effort. Use the keys to just kind of get it to where you want it. And in this case, what we're looking for, we're not looking for the color here as well. We're just literally looking only for the texture. So we would bring up our hue and saturation panel, and then we would desaturate it here. I'll bring it down. That looks nice. So up, whenever you zoom in, for example, you see just what that looks like at 100%. So again, it looks like this lovely crumbling or peeling paint texture that kind of just evokes a sense of abandonedness, or a cabin that's just kind of left on its own. Now, sometimes you might find a texture and it makes, when you apply it, it kind of makes your thing unreadable. Now, there's a few different things. You definitely kind of, I want to try to avoid going with the opacity here, because generally what happens is that it leads to looking a little bit faded out, and it's not really what we want. We still want the texture, we just don't want it to kind of go on like making the whole thing unreadable, because sometimes when you put the texture here, it can kind of blend in with the background a little bit. And that you might need to search around for a couple of different textures. Maybe this one here is not the one that you want. Maybe it's like a different, just keep looking around, because there's occasionally that whenever I do this, sometimes I'll search and I think this is like the perfect texture, and then when I bring it in, it's just kind of unreadable behind the image. So one of the tricks that I could do as well is you can just have a simple gradient here behind it. So we have a nice gradient, and that's all it looks. It's just a black going to transparent, and we set it to multiply, so it just kind of blends in with our image behind it. And then we just bring the opacity down until we have it roughly where we want it, where it's the kind of text is standing out more against the background. You don't want to go too much, because then it just looks bad. So again, it's all about subtlety and just bringing it in. So around about 20%, 18%, that looks nice. That's a very, very simple effort at putting texture on your screen. And again, going back to, for example, here we have this other texture here of if we wanted to bring in another nice little bit. So this is one of the things that we brought off in the finding your font video. And I'm going to show you two different ways of doing this and the differences between them. So if we just bring in this image all on its own and we paste it, okay, so we've got this kind of whiteness around it. Now, one of the things we can do is we can do a multiply, and in that case the white multiplies with the color behind it, so it kind of disappears, and we get this kind of ended up of let's just scale that down a wee bit. So we have this kind of like, it's almost like a transparent handprint, which may be what you're looking for. Now, another way of doing this as well is that if you go in and you go into the channels, this is one of the things, the techniques that you show you in the YouTube video that I'll link below, and you select the RGB channel and we invert that selection and we just copy this. This lets us take just the handprint itself without the white, and so we can end up with a better color. So again, whichever one you want, you can see the difference in the color there. So whichever one you want, or whichever technique you want, I suppose it will give you different results. So say we go like there. Okay, that's nice. And we'll just get rid of this one here for the minute. So again, we can follow the same sort of effort. All right, we can kind of position this where we want it. Say like there. And again, we select our text and we create a mask for this layer. So now we have a handprint over our title, which again is it's just another little bit. So now we've kind of moved from a kind of an abandoned font to a kind of a horror font. You know? So just it's a very, very simple technique, but it kind of lets you bring a little bit more. And sometimes it can be very, very powerful if it's used right. Again, subtlety is the key, but you know, just kind of mess around. Like sometimes you'll not find the perfect texture on the first go, but you know, sometimes it just works.